This morning I offered to share some experiences that I had with Shri Mataji in relation to some very difficult times that I saw that she and us as a family went through. But mostly started with two incidences. One was we were in New York City. This was in, I think, also in possibly in 2001 later. But first in 1999, where we were in Ganpati Pule, and this was the year that Baba Mama fell quite sick. And I was in the train which was going from Bombay to Ganpati Pule, and we were in this special salon compartment. And Baba Mama was one section, Shri Mataji was in one section, and I was sleeping there were some sleeper areas towards the end of the compartment. And during dinner time, I remember I came into her room and we were eating together. And Baba Mama was on the left side, and at that point he was already on a kidney dialysis because his kidneys had started to falter at that time because of the diabetes. And Shri Mataji was expressing discontent over something, over his treatment and some other things. But I was really quite curious because she never asked for him to be brought there in front of her and work on him or anything. And later also in the cottage, I remember I was downstairs with my father, she was on top in her suite in Ganpati Pule, in the cottage. And many times she would ask someone to find out how Baba Mama was, but there was nothing more. There was not that he had to be brought there and that she would work on him and so on and so forth. He was being looked after by, I think, some musicians from Nagpur and so on. Then if you remember, if you see the video, there was one evening in Ganpati Pule where he started to feel more sick in the evening program, and he was then taken away from the stage and so on. And I remember that I became very curious, and in those days I had this opportunity because we would go back to the cottage where she was very late at night, and she would then ask the whole place to be cleared, and I would have dinner with her, and then we would be on the terrace late at night, and she would chat for hours. And this conversation I had was in Hindi, but I'm trying to translate for all of us in English. And I asked why there is such an event of tragedy in the lives of so many yogis, which I had been seeing. Even I was living in Los Angeles at that time, and even here there was some very tragic situations happening. And it was, a question that I had, that why do people have to go through this? And there is sometimes death, sometimes there is pain, there is friction, very heavy friction between people. And what I was very amazed about was that she was not very reactive as to saying that things were wrong. And Shri Mataji was explaining more that in the concept of time, we are not able to see this axis of time as the divine does. We see things between a moment and another where we feel bad about certain things or we react emotionally towards certain events, towards death, towards tragedy, towards friction. But at the level of the spirit, this becomes a much greater program in the aspect of time. And with the aspect of time that is pulling through our destiny, our lives, there is resolution only and further resolution as time passes. And when I look back at it, many of the people that I saw who were suffering, their suffering at the end finished, or there was passing of someone, or there was drastic change in their lives. And there was a completely different configuration of the way they were living. And I asked, I said, but this is something why can't the life be completely painless and completely smooth and without any friction? And what she explained is that us as yogis, we in particular could be faced with more challenges than normal people, because we are put on a track of evolution that is separate, that is different. But in every case, there is a challenge, a problem, but that problem is always put into place with a solution. There is no problem that is put into place in anyone's life without a solution. That she says that doesn't exist. That is, and when we think that we have made a choice and we have entered into a problem because of that choice, and she said, no, even your thoughts, even your issues, even your problems, they are all guided and configured by God. In a way, you are in a situation where nothing is in fact of your making. And I remember that, being in the Sahaj temple, many times in those days, people would come with sick people, with, people with health issues. And she was not happy once, and she said, I'm not here to save you from your physical issues. If you have a pain, go to the hospital and check why you have that pain. If you're sick, go and get diagnosed at a hospital about, your problems. I'm here as your spiritual doctor. And this really hit home, because I remember a lot of people who would initially come or seek Shri Mataji, a meeting with Shri Mataji, all came with health issues. And she would sometimes entertain them, maybe even work on them. But I didn't see that she was very interested in spending more time, and sometimes she would even ask these people to be sent back. Now, I will tell you a small incident that happened later, where a very important man came to see her in New York City. We were all in New York City. He was a very important man. I can't take his name because of privacy reasons, but he was an extremely important man in those days of the armed forces of India. And we were sitting in the living room, and he had his whole team with him, and he was a tremendous respect for Shri Mataji. And he had some health issues. And she asked him to come forward, and she put her leg on his liver, and she sat and chatted with him for 15-20 minutes. Then he had his own meeting, so he left. When he left, she turned to me. I was sitting on the left, and she said, he will not live very long. I was quite amazed because he looked totally functional. And then after 3 to 4 weeks, I think, I got a phone call that that person had passed away. And same in Ganpati Pule, when we were together that time and Baba Mama's health was going down. 3 to 4 weeks later, again, same thing, he left. And I remember that I spoke to Shri Mataji on the phone at that time, and she was not in a mood of grieving in any form. And I really was very, very observant of that, because it seemed that, when we as yogis look at an ill health or a terminal situation or a situation where our lives are, in some sort of threat, we start to give bandhans, or we do, other sort of salutations to Shri Mataji. But from what I understood from that conversation, she was saying was that the tug of destiny, the pull of destiny is such, in our cases, that story has already been written and set in stone by the divine. And that is why there is such a strong concept of surrender. That is, in all her talks, you can say that. You can see that she talks about surrendering, about letting go, and letting the divine work things out. And again, when I asked her, I said, but do we make mistakes? Do we do things that are incorrect, and do we suffer because we have to suffer because of these mistakes? And she said something very interesting. She said, your personality is not created by you. Your instinct is not created by you. It is also a creation of God. You are different from person Y. You are not the same as another person. And your evolutionary story is based on those triggers, those mechanisms that are put in place in your personality. And that's not a mistake. God does not make that sort of a mistake by creating you. But God allows you to live through that mistake only for one reason, that is evolution. And nothing happens outside. There is no event, no matter how ugly, how horrible, how dismal. Nothing happens outside that phase of evolution. Everything is within evolution. And I used to see many times stories of people coming to Shri Mataji and saying, Shri Mataji, I have a relative and he's in this kind of problem and that kind of problem. And then, there was a man who came and said, oh, my son is not doing anything and he's not able to get hold of his life. And she told him, she said, I know many people who are doing extremely well in their professional lives and in their their financial aspects. And then she said, but their spiritual life ultimately is in ruin. So there is no point of hankering over an issue or living in angst of an issue, because that perspective is not complete through the spiritual perspective. And that's why this gift of Shri Mataji, what she said on that day on the terrace, is that you transcend on top of destiny when you are the spirit, or when your attention is maintained on the spirit. You are watching the play, you are watching the whole story unravel. And this is in Shri Mataji's talks. And this is why, recently, why I wanted to share these incidences were because I see a lot of yogis, they are very anxious, or they feel, their lives are not going in the right direction, or they are troubled. They are unhappy. There is a lot of friction between their close relations. And in a way, these are things that are, in a way, set up by God beforehand, and by the divine beforehand. And in many of the talks where Shri Mataji says, you don't really do anything. And that is why there is the concept of the lack of guilt. And in those, I remember through those days, she was entertaining people, praising them, giving them a lot of importance. And a lot of these people ultimately left Saj Yoga, or they found their way in other things. They did not have, the wherewithal to maintain their place there. And again, in that perspective, many a times she said that, Saj Yoga is one creation of mine. There's, it has its own limits. And it was again a very, very, a conversation which to me was very interesting, because it was away from what we seek God for. We seek God for change, for improvement, for a better life, for our desires to be fulfilled. But here was Shri Mataji saying, look, that's all null and void at the level of the spirit. It becomes a big zero. And you are living through things and going through these motions regardless, and you will go through it because time is going to keep flowing and your lives are going to keep progressing in that way. I also will tell you that many a time Shri Mataji was pushing our lives, as my life, as as a relative, as a grandson, into a direction, into a decision where she already knew that was going to fail. That what she's asking me to do is going to end up failing. And I saw this not once, not twice, many times. And sometimes those things that she would ask me to do would end up putting me in a huge problem. To the point that once when I was younger, I even got really upset and I said, Nani, why did you ask me to do that? I landed myself in a huge problem. And she would laugh and smile and she said, okay, I'm sorry, it's okay, it doesn't matter, leave it. And so I saw and I observed that many a times these incidences that are creating friction, that are creating issues for you, sometimes these are put in place by God and created by God for your own evolution. I remember a case where there was a young girl who came in the Sahaj temple, and she, the story was that her parents had threatened to do something horrible because she was getting married in Saj Yoga. So she came in, she was talking to Shri Mataji, and she came, and there was a discussion, and Shri Mataji, she expressed shock, and she said, "Oh, dusht, the terrible people, how could they do this?" And then, the girl was saying, but I don't want to go back to my house, and, I don't want to risk myself in this horrible situation. And Shri Mataji insisted, said, no, go back. It's okay. Nothing will happen. And she went back, and nothing happened. And she got married, and it all just sort of worked out for this girl. And that's where I can share this, that in the scope of our vision of how we look at a situation of conflict, every material, our brains, our neurochemistry, our bodies, our relationships with others, they are sort of in, and this Shri Mataji puts in the tapes also, you can hear this, where she says, everything else is changeable, it will change, it can change. But your spirit is above. This is where the attention has to be, in that thoughtless state, in that surrendered state, at the level of the spirit. If that attention is there at that space, you are transcending everything, and everything can become in your control. It can serve you. But if you remove that attention, then again, you go back into that drama, into that state where you're not a witness and you're inside that system. But she says, even that experience where you are fighting, you are reacting like a human being, where you are running from something, or you are forced to be in a state of tears or in a state of angst, that is also a cathartic mechanism that leads to resolution with time. And that's where on that day, she was explaining that you have to look at this aspect of time very strongly. It's a major player in your life. Time is going to reveal things, and time is going to bring you into comfort. But if you get stuck in a moment, that will be very difficult. That year was in 1999. I remember it was the turn of the century, and I remember there was a plane that was hijacked. An Indian Airlines plane had been hijacked. It had been taken to Afghanistan, and we were watching this whole thing happen on TV, I remember. And despite all the things that, were going on, I did not see Shri Mataji in a very reactive state. And this is again what made me very curious, what made me very much wanting to ask her about this. Is that she would sometimes say, someone is in pain, it's okay. Someone is sick, okay. Someone is in a problem, fine. She was never ever, I did not see her react to dismissing an issue or dismissing a problem for itself happening. That it should not have happened, or it should have not been, like this. She always took a situation from the point that the problem existed, and accepted the problem as if it was part of our entire spiritual being. The conflict or the issue was part of our spiritual story. I can also tell you that later, as both my grandparents, their health was starting to, in some form of decline. I went with Shri Mataji to the hospital once in the van, in Kabela, and we went to see Sir CP, and he was having a surgery. And she did not really speak through for 1 hour in that journey. I remember she was very quiet. She was just looking out of the window. And we reached, and she went to Mr. Srivastava, and he had just come out of the anesthetic, and he was sort of just speaking in a very emotional way. And she was laughing. She was actually laughing. Many a times where, all of us went through, I can share very personally with me a story that happened in my life. I was in Australia in 2008. My marriage broke. I had a marriage which broke. And I was completely aghast as to, what was happening. And I went in, it was 5:30, 6 o'clock, and very early in the morning, and she asked that I come and see her. And my mother was troubled, CP was completely confused, and everything was upside down. And Shri Mataji was sitting on a wheelchair, there were some yogis behind her, and I went to see her at 5:30. And she asked some people to leave the room, and I entered, and she looked at me and she started laughing. She started laughing very loudly. So even I started laughing. And we just kept laughing. And it was completely absurd. The whole thing was completely absurd. And I sat down in front of her and she said, whatever it is, just forget it. Doesn't matter. And she changed the subject and she started talking about something else. And, all of us were in a different mood. Somebody was dealing with, paperwork and so on, and how my marriage would be dissolved and this and that. And I remember that I went back, and there was this issue in the Indian court when I was getting divorced. And I remember went back to that conversation, and I meditated, and I went back to that conversation I had with Shri Mataji. And I said, I'm going to see how this works, because there was a problem where I was not able to get a decision from the court. And it just kept going, and it kept going, and it kept going, and up and down, and left and right. And finally, I got in touch. Something, in my sastra it came that there was a yogi called Udo in Austria. And he was a judge. And I didn't, I was not in touch with Shri Mataji at all. She was not even asking about any of this. And I called him up, and I called him up myself, and I explained to him, I said, look, you need to talk to the person I was married to and sort this out with her. And unbelievably, this whole thing just came back around, went around, and everything within 1 week was resolved. Everything just came to an end. And when I look back at it, everything that happened, including my marriage with Fatima, so on and so forth, there were so many miraculous incidences in those 2 years, including the time when I was with Fatima in I don't know, many of you maybe I didn't share, but we were in the Trident Hotel, in what is the Trident Hotel today, but was the Oberoi Hotel, in 2008. And at that time, suddenly my father-in-law, we were in the hotel, and he got a call from France, and he said that his bosses told him that he had to come to France to attend a meeting. And this is why we could not stay in the hotel, because the hotel was paid for by his job. At the same time, Shri Mataji calls, and she says, why don't you come to Pratishthan? So we all left. It's myself, my mother-in-law, Fatima, we all left. And we went to Pratishthan, out of the blue. And I think we arrived on the 23rd in Pratishthan. And on the 26th of November, there was this massive terrorist attack in the hotel. And I remember in the morning that I got up and Mr. Pugalia called in the room, and he said, can you see what's happening? And this was such a horrible, disastrous event, that where so many people were killed. And again, when you think of it and you reverse all these stories and you wonder how the divine is planning what, who is chosen for what, it is almost impossible to understand. So, in a way, what I'm sharing with you today is that if you are in angst, if you're in trouble, if you feel challenged, if you feel in conflict with someone, or you feel like things are not working, just be patient and allow things to lead in the way that they are set up. Because, in fact, this is again going back to that issue and that conversation that I had. Allow the configuration of your problem, the way it is, to lead the way. Let it be. And this is again from Shri Mataji's talks, where she talks about surrendering, and leave it. Let that time work through its own aspect, and maintain in that meditative state. I will even tell you that sometimes I would be sitting with Shri Mataji at a dinner table worrying about something. It happened many times. And she would look at me and she would say, "Why are you making that face?" I said, "I'm not making a face." She said, No, I know you're thinking about something." She said, "Don't do that. Don't do that. Go into the thoughtless state." To this extent. And this was something that she always pushed me into. She said, "You are in an angst, you are worried for nothing. If you are supposed to be in pain, you are going to be in pain. You will not be able to disentangle that. But you are doing it pointlessly. Go into that thoughtless state, and that way you will rise above the pain." That much it makes. So I will stop here. I hope this was interesting or helpful. But if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Hello, Anand. I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
Do you have a trick in those kind of situations to go to thoughtless state?
I'm sorry, please?
Is there a trick you have in those kind of situations to go in thoughtless state?
I do have a trick, because in a way it is just tell yourself what has to happen is going to happen. It always works. For me, it always works. What is going to happen will happen, whether you do this or that or anything else. What is written in that problem solution configuration for your life is going to end up, you are not controlling it anyway. So this illusion of control over the incidents or this problem that is happening, if you are thinking, "Oh, I control this," this is also wrong. So when you go into thoughtlessness, you are allowing Shri Mataji to work for you, to work out the problem. But if you are thinking about the problem, you are stopping. And this is in the talks where she says even one thought will stop the divine from its job. Leave the thought, because you are just interfering with the divine in that way. I hope this helps.
And so how do you know that you reached that state when it's really difficult and there is many emotions or maybe pain, physical, that, okay, I go above, but still I can see the drama, I can feel the emotion. How do you really attest that now, I reached that state, I'm there?
I think you will reach that state when you accept the resolution of the problem in whatever way it is. If you are saying to the divine, okay, if you take me in this direction, that's fine. If you take me in that direction, it's fine. If you take me forward, it's fine. Everything is fine. Because Sarah, in the context of the divine, even when, let's just say, again, another story. There was a yogi in India. He was having a child who had there was a genetic issue in the couple. And he lost one child. Then he lost a second child. The children would go till 5-6 years old and they would pass away. Then another child would be born. That child would live for 3-4 years and then that child would pass away. This I can't even imagine being able to bear it. But he went through it. He went through it. And today, then he adopted one child. And he's living. He's there. He's survived it. And this is what I say is that this issue was put in his life with a package that even the solution was created by God. It is not your solution. It is again God's solution. So if you are not finding the solution, what's the point?
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good morning. Really enjoyed the meditation. Jai Shri Mataji. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Jai Shri Mataji.
Thank you, Jai Shri Mataji.
Thank you, Anand. Jai Shri Mataji.
Jai Shri Mataji.
Thank you so much, Jai Shri Mataji.
Jai Shri Mataji.
Thank you, Anand. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bhaiya. Bhaiya, I have some questions, but I would like to ask you in another chat. In a chat, so that it's my personal thing. So I would like to ask some questions regarding what I face, which is very subtle, but it's very difficult to share. Sometimes
sure.
That's why. Maybe in the chat or maybe WhatsApp.
You have my number there if you have a question or something.
Yes,
please, no problem. No worries.
Yes, Bhaiya.
Jai Shri Mataji, take care.
Yeah, thank you.